The first time my brother told me our mother's house was no longer my concern, he said it so calmly that for a few seconds, I actually wondered if I had misunderstood him. We were standing in my mother's kitchen. The same kitchen where my brother and I had eaten cereal before school, argued over the last piece of toast, and sat beside our mother while she wrapped Christmas presents at the table. I looked at him and said, "What do you mean? It's not my concern." He put his car keys on the counter. "It's my responsibility now." I stared at him. "Since when?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the hallway, where our mother was resting in her bedroom. Then he lowered his voice. "Since Mom signed everything over." I remember the exact sound the refrigerator made behind me. A low hum. Ordinary. Almost painfully ordinary. Because my entire understanding of my family had just changed in the middle of that kitchen. And the strangest part was that I had no idea what my brother meant by everything. If stories about family betrayal and unexpected karma are your kind of stories, take a moment to subscribe to Royal Revenge Stories, leave a like, and stay with me. Because what I discovered later made me realize that the house was only the beginning. My name is Daniel Mercer, and at the time all of this happened, I was 42 years old. I lived about 40 minutes from my mother, in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. I worked as an operations manager for a regional medical supply company. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that would make anyone stop and stare. I had a steady salary, a modest house, a mortgage, and a life that was mostly predictable. My younger sister, Rachel, lived in Indianapolis with her husband and their 2 children. And then there was my older brother, Michael. Michael was 47. He had always been the confident one. Even as a kid, he had a way of walking into a room as if someone had already handed him the keys. He was charming when he wanted to be. He could make my mother laugh when she was angry. He could convince people that whatever he wanted was actually their idea. And growing up, I admired that about him. I really did. For most of my childhood, Michael was the person I followed. If he wanted to build a treehouse, I helped. If he wanted to sneak into the old shed behind our house, I followed him. If he got in trouble, I usually tried to explain to our parents why he hadn't meant it. Looking back, I realized something important. I had spent most of my life confusing loyalty with trust. And Michael knew it. Our father died when I was 34. It was sudden. A heart attack. There was no long illness, no warning that gave us time to prepare. One week he was complaining about the price of groceries. The next week we were standing in a funeral home choosing a casket. My mother never really recovered from losing him. She functioned. She went to appointments. She paid bills. She attended church. She called us on birthdays. But there was a quietness in her after Dad died that never completely disappeared. The house became even more important to her after that. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even particularly large. 3 bedrooms. 2 bathrooms. A detached garage. A small backyard with an old maple tree my father had planted when Michael and I were teenagers. But my parents had owned it for almost 30 years. Every wall contained some piece of our family history. Dad's workshop was still in the garage. Mom's recipe cards were still taped inside one kitchen cabinet. There was a dent in the hallway wall from the time Michael and I had tried to move a sofa without asking for help. And in the basement, there was still a wooden shelf Dad had built by hand. My mother used to say that house wasn't just property. It was the last place where she could still feel like our family was together. So when she began having trouble managing certain things, we all tried to help. At least that's what I thought. The first signs were small. Mom started forgetting appointments. Then she misplaced a few bills. Once, she called me because she couldn't remember whether she'd already paid her property taxes. I drove over that evening. We sat at her dining table with a stack of envelopes between us. I helped her organize everything. That's when Michael began becoming more involved. At first, I was grateful. He lived closer. Only about 15 minutes away. He started taking Mom to appointments. He picked up prescriptions. He handled small repairs around the house. He even arranged for someone to mow the lawn. I remember telling Rachel, "Michael's really stepping up." Rachel agreed. He always was good with Mom. And for a while, I believed that. Completely. Then little things started changing. Mom stopped answering some of my calls. Not all of them. Just enough for me to notice. I'd call on Tuesday. No answer. I'd call Wednesday. Still nothing. Then Thursday afternoon, Michael would text me. "She's fine. She's just tired." I would call Mom later that evening, and suddenly she'd answer. Sometimes she'd sound confused. Sometimes she'd say she had been sleeping. I didn't think much of it. My mother was 73. She had earned the right to sleep through a few phone calls. The first moment that really bothered me happened at Thanksgiving. We were sitting around the dining table. Rachel had driven in with her family. Mom had made too much food, as usual. There was turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans, rolls, cranberry sauce, and 3 different pies. Michael sat beside Mom. He had started answering questions for her. At first, it was harmless. Rachel asked Mom whether she had talked to her doctor about her knee. Before Mom could answer, Michael said, "The doctor said it's arthritis. Nothing serious." Rachel looked at him. I asked Mom. Michael smiled. "I'm just answering because we've already talked about it." I remember Mom looking down at her plate. That bothered me more than what Michael said. After dinner, I found her alone in the kitchen. I asked, "Mom, are you okay?" She smiled. "Of course. You seem tired." "I am a little." Then she reached for a dish towel. I stopped her. "I'll do that." She looked at me for a second. Then she said quietly, "Your brother has been helping me a lot." "I know. He worries about me." "I know." She smiled. "I think sometimes you boys don't realize how much he does." There was something about the way she said it that stayed with me. Not because she was praising Michael, but because it sounded like she was defending him. I didn't understand why. A few weeks later, I received a message from Michael. "Can you send me a copy of Mom's old insurance information?" I asked why. He said he was helping organize her paperwork. I sent it. Then he asked for something else. A copy of Dad's old death certificate. I asked why he needed that. He said it was for some paperwork related to the house. That was the first time I felt a tiny knot form in my stomach. "What paperwork?" His response came almost immediately. "Nothing you need to worry about." I stared at the screen. I typed, "What does that mean?" 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally. "I'm handling it." I should have pushed harder. I didn't. That became one of the biggest regrets of my life. Because a month later, Mom called me. Her voice sounded strange. She said, "Daniel, I need you to come over." "Is everything okay?" There was a pause. "I don't know." That got my attention. I left work early. When I arrived, Michael's truck was already parked outside. I walked through the front door. Michael was sitting at the dining table. There were papers spread in front of him. Mom was sitting across from him. She looked exhausted. I glanced at Michael. "What happened?" He leaned back. Nothing happened. I looked at Mom. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I walked over to her. Mom? She finally looked up. Your brother thinks it would be better if he handled the house. I looked at Michael. What does that mean? He sighed. Daniel, don't make this difficult. I'm asking a question. Michael tapped one of the papers. Mom doesn't need to worry about the property anymore. What property? He gave me a look. You know exactly what property. The house? Yes. I looked at Mom. Did you agree to this? She nodded. Slowly. My stomach dropped. Why? She didn't answer. Michael did. Because I'm the one taking care of everything. I felt something inside me snap. You're taking care of her. That doesn't mean you own her house. Michael's expression changed. Not much. Just enough. Watch how you speak to me. Then explain what you mean. He pushed one of the papers toward me. I don't have to explain anything. I picked it up. It was a property document. I scanned the page. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a real estate professional. But I understood enough to see that my mother's name wasn't appearing the way I expected. I looked at Michael. What is this? He leaned forward. Mom transferred ownership. I turned toward her. Mom? Her eyes filled with tears. I thought it was the right thing. Why? Michael stood. Because someone has to protect the house. I laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because I didn't know what else to do. From who? Michael stared at me. From people who don't show up until there's something to inherit. The room went completely silent. I felt those words hit harder than they should have. Because I knew exactly what he meant. He meant me. I had spent years driving 40 minutes to visit our mother. I had paid for repairs. I had helped with medical bills. I had taken time off work when she needed surgery. But suddenly I was the son who only cared about inheritance. I looked at him. You really believe that? He didn't answer. Mom whispered, please don't fight. I looked at her. Mom, did you understand what you signed? She hesitated. That hesitation frightened me. Michael stepped between us. She understood perfectly. I looked at him. I wasn't asking you. His jaw tightened. Mom reached for my hand. Daniel, please. I took her hand. It was cold. I just want to make sure you're okay. I am. Are you sure? She nodded. But she wouldn't look at me. I left that evening feeling like I had lost something I couldn't name. I didn't call Michael afterward. He didn't call me. For nearly 3 weeks, we barely spoke. Then Rachel called. She sounded worried. Daniel, have you talked to Mom? Not much. She told me Michael is managing her finances now. I sat up. What? That's what she said. Sink. When? I don't know. I felt that not return. Did she say why? Rachel hesitated. She said Michael told her you were angry about the house. I stared at my living room wall. That's not why I'm angry. I know. Rachel, something isn't right. She was quiet. Then she said something that made me sit completely still. There's another thing. What? Mom asked me last week if I had ever signed anything for Michael. My heart started beating faster. What kind of thing? She wouldn't say. Did you? No. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Rachel said, Daniel, I think you need to look into this. I agreed. But I didn't know where to start. I wasn't trying to take my mother's house. I wasn't trying to win a fight with my brother. I just wanted to understand what was happening. So I did something I should have done much earlier. I stopped asking Michael questions. And I started looking at the facts. The next Saturday, I went through the old documents I still had from Dad's estate. Most of them were copies. Insurance paperwork. Tax records. Old bank statements. A few letters from the attorney who had handled Dad's estate. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Then I found a folder I hadn't opened in years. Inside was a photocopy of an old property statement. I looked at the date. It was from 2 years earlier. The ownership listed on it was exactly what I expected. My parents. I compared it with the document Michael had shown me. There was a difference. Not a huge one. But enough. The newer document contained language I didn't fully understand. I took a picture of it. Then I called an attorney I knew through work. Her name was Susan Hale. I didn't tell her the entire family story. I simply said, I need help understanding a property document. She agreed to look at it. I emailed her the copies. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Daniel, she said, where did you get this? From my brother. There was a pause. Did your mother knowingly sign this? I don't know. That's important. I know. Another pause. Then she said something that changed the direction of everything. There's something else you should check. What? Look at the date on this document. I did. No. Look at it carefully. I pulled the document back up. Susan continued. The transfer happened almost 2 months before your mother supposedly agreed to let your brother manage the property. I frowned. That doesn't make sense. It gets stranger. I waited. Susan said, according to this record, your brother wasn't simply added to the property. My throat tightened. What was he added as? She took a breath. That's what I think you need to find out. I looked down at the document again. For the first time, I noticed a second reference number near the bottom. M. A number I had never seen before. Susan told me to request the complete property record from the county recorder's office. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat at my kitchen table for nearly an hour without moving. I kept thinking about my mother's hesitation. Michael's sudden control over her finances. The document. The date. And the questions Susan had refused to answer for me. The following Monday, I requested the record. When the file arrived, I opened it expecting to find some explanation that would make everything seem less serious. Instead, I found a document that contained my brother's name. And beside his name was something that made my hands go cold. It wasn't simply ownership. It was a financial interest tied to the property. And the date on that agreement was months before my mother ever told us she wanted Michael to help with the house. I read it 3 times. Then I noticed the name of the institution listed on the document. It was a bank. And suddenly, I understood why Michael had been so interested in our father's old death certificate. But I still didn't understand the most important part. Why would my brother need our mother's house as security for something he had never told the family about? I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the document open on my laptop until almost 2 in the morning. Every time I thought I understood it, I found another detail that made me question what I was looking at. Michael hadn't simply taken control of the house. He had used it as part of a financial arrangement. And apparently, that arrangement had existed before my mother ever told Rachel and me that she wanted Michael to handle the property. That distinction mattered. A lot. The next morning, I called Susan again. She answered on the second ring. Daniel? I found the full record. Okay. I think I understand what Michael did. There was a pause. Tell me. I explained what I'd found. Susan listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Don't confront him yet." I wasn't planning to. Good. Why? Because right now you don't know enough. I leaned back in my chair. What else could there be? The agreement you found may be connected to a larger transaction. You need to know what obligation your brother was trying to secure before you decide what his intention was. So what do I do? Get the complete filing history. And find out whether your mother signed anything else around the same period. Can I get that? If you're not authorized to access her private financial records, don't try to obtain them improperly. But property filings are different. You can request public records. And your mother can request her own financial documents if she's willing. That last part bothered me. Because I didn't know if she was willing. And I didn't know whether Eichel had convinced her that I was trying to take the house. I called Mom that afternoon. She answered after several rings. "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice sounded tired. "Mom, can I come over?" There was a pause. "Why?" "I just want to see you." Another pause. Then she said, "Michael doesn't think it's a good idea for us to discuss the house." My chest tightened. "Mom, I'm not coming to discuss the house." "You're angry." "I am." She sighed. "I knew you would be." "I'm not angry at you." That wasn't completely true. I was angry. But underneath the anger was fear. Fear that she had signed something she didn't understand. Fear that Michael had been controlling more than we realized. And fear that by the time I understood what was happening, there would be nothing left to protect. Mom finally said, "Come tomorrow." I drove over after work. When I arrived, Michael's truck wasn't there. That surprised me. I knocked. Mom opened the door. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Just tired. I hugged her. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." I pulled back. For what? She looked toward the living room. Everything. "Mom, sit down." We went into the kitchen. I made tea. She didn't drink hers. I placed the property document on the table. Her eyes immediately went to it. "Where did you get that?" "Michael gave me a copy." She looked uncomfortable. "Did you understand what you signed?" "Yes." The answer came too quickly. I didn't challenge her. Instead, I asked, "Why did you sign it?" She stared at her hands. "Because Michael said it was temporary." My stomach dropped. Temporary? He said he needed it for a business loan. What business loan? She didn't answer. "Mom?" She looked at me. I didn't know all the details. I felt my anger rising. "Then why did you sign?" "Because he told me everything would be okay." I looked away. That sentence sounded exactly like Michael. Everything would be okay. Don't worry. I'll handle it. You don't need to understand all the details. I had heard versions of those words my entire life. But now they had cost our mother something. I asked quietly, "How much money did he borrow?" "I don't know." That answer frightened me more than anything else. "Mom, did he tell you?" "He said it wasn't my debt." That doesn't answer the question. She looked toward the window. "I think it was around $200,000. I stopped breathing for a moment. $200,000? She nodded. "But he said it was secured by the house." Another nod. I stood up. "Mom, that's not temporary." "I know that now." I looked at her. She finally started crying. I thought I was helping my son. I sat back down. My anger disappeared for a moment. All I could see was my mother sitting across from me, crying over a decision she thought would help her family. I reached across the table. You didn't do this to us. She wiped her eyes. Michael said you didn't care about the house. I don't care about the house. She looked at me. I care about you. That was when she finally broke down. She told me Michael had been under financial pressure for almost a year. His business had been struggling. He had lost 2 major clients. Then his partner had left. Michael apparently owed money to several suppliers and had fallen behind on some payments. He hadn't told Rachel or me. Instead, he told Mom that he needed a short-term loan. He promised her he would repay it quickly. She believed him. Then came the part that made everything more complicated. Michael hadn't told her the full amount. He had told her the bank needed security. He said the house would only be used temporarily. And he had apparently brought a notary to the house. My mother had signed several documents at the dining table. She thought they were all related to the same loan. I asked her, did anyone explain each document to you? She shook her head. Michael said there wasn't time. I closed my eyes. There it was. The first piece of the puzzle. But something still didn't fit. If Michael was struggling financially, why had he been so aggressive about keeping me away? Why had he told everyone that I only cared about inheritance? And why had he transferred the property arrangement months before telling Mom the loan was temporary? I asked her if she had copies. She said Michael had them. Then she said something that stopped me. I think there's another folder. Where? In your father's old desk. I knew the desk. It had been in the basement since Dad died. Mom rarely opened it. She said Michael had gone through it several times after Dad's death. We went downstairs. The basement smelled like dust and old cardboard. Dad's desk was pushed against the wall. Mom opened the top drawer. Nothing. Second drawer. Old receipts. Third drawer. Nothing. Then she stopped. There. She pointed toward the bottom. A thin wooden compartment was hidden underneath the lowest drawer. I had forgotten it existed. Dad had built that desk himself. I pulled the drawer out. Behind it was a narrow space. There were several envelopes inside. Most were old. One wasn't. It was addressed to Michael. I looked at Mom. Did you put this here? No. The envelope was sealed. I didn't want to open it. Then I noticed the return address. It was from the bank listed on the property document. I looked at Mom. She nodded. Open it. Inside was a letter. I read the first paragraph. Then the second. My hands began shaking. The bank was notifying Michael that his loan was already in default. Not at risk of default. Already in default. The date was 6 weeks earlier. I looked at Mom. Did you know about this? She shook her head. No. I kept reading. The bank had DEMA. Debt payment within a specified period. If the obligation wasn't resolved, the lender could pursue the collateral according to the terms of the agreement. The collateral was my mother's house. I felt sick. Michael hadn't been protecting the house. He had been gambling with it. And apparently, he was losing. But then I saw something else. A second page. There was a reference to another agreement. I read it twice. It appeared Michael had pledged additional assets connected to his business. That made sense. But one line didn't. The bank referred to a prior transfer involving my mother's property. Prior transfer. Not recent. I looked at Mom. Mom, when did Michael first ask you to sign something? She thought. Last spring. What month? April, maybe. I checked the date on the filing. March. 1 month earlier. My heart started pounding. Mom, are you sure? She looked confused. About what? The date. I might be wrong. I wasn't sure either. But I knew I needed the original records. I photographed the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then I asked Mom not to tell Michael we'd found it. She looked frightened. Why? Because I need to know what we're dealing with before he knows we know. She nodded. For the first time in weeks, I saw something change in her expression. Not fear. Determination. I want my house back, she said. I looked at her. Then we'll find out exactly what happened. The next day, I met Susan at her office. I brought copies of everything. She studied the documents carefully. After nearly 20 minutes, she leaned back. This is more complicated than a simple loan. What does that mean? It means your brother may have structured this in stages. I frowned. Why? Possibly to make the property appear less connected to the business debt. I stared at her. Are you saying he planned this? I don't know. But it looks like it. It looks like he may have known his business was in trouble before he told your mother. That sentence stayed with me. Because suddenly, all the little things started making sense. The questions about Dad's death certificate. The insurance information. The paperwork. The sudden control over Mom's finances. The insistence that I stay out of it. None of those things had seemed important individually. Together, they looked different. I asked Susan what we could do. She told me the first step was protecting my mother from signing anything else without independent advice. She also suggested that Mom meet with an attorney without Michael present. That sounded simple. It wasn't. Because when I mentioned it to Mom, she immediately became nervous. What if Michael gets angry? He might. He's my son. So are you. She looked at me. I realized she wasn't worried about losing the house. Not yet. She was worried about losing Michael. That was the hardest part. People think betrayal is about money. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the worst part is realizing the person who hurt you is someone you still desperately want to believe is good. Mom kept defending him. He didn't mean for this to happen. Maybe not. He's under pressure. I know. He was trying to save his business. I looked at her. Mom, saving his business isn't the same thing as putting your house at risk. She looked down. I know. Then she whispered something I hadn't expected. He told me you would never understand. I asked, understand what? She shook her head. He said you were always the responsible one. The successful one. The one Dad trusted. I didn't know what to say. Then she continued. He said Dad left you everything that mattered. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Because suddenly, I understood part of Michael's motivation. It wasn't just money. It was resentment. For years, he had believed Dad trusted me more. He thought I had the stable career. The stable marriage. The stable life. And now, when his business was collapsing, he saw our mother's house as something he deserved. Something that would finally prove he wasn't the family disappointment. That didn't excuse what he had done. But it made him human. And somehow, that made it worse. 3 days later, Michael called me. I almost didn't answer. But I did. What? His voice was calm. You've been talking to Mom. Yes. About the house. Yes. He sighed. Daniel, I really don't want this to become ugly. Neither do I. Then stop interfering. I haven't interfered. You're putting ideas in her head. No. I'm asking her questions. You've always done that. What does that mean? You make people doubt themselves. I almost laughed. Michael, you're the one who put Mom's house up as collateral. Silence. For the first time since this began, he had nothing to say. Then his voice changed. Who told you that? I said nothing. He tried again. Daniel. Still nothing. Finally, he said, you don't understand the situation. I understand that the loan is in default. Another silence. How did you find that out? I looked at the wall. You tell me. His breathing became heavier. Then he said something I would remember for a very long time. You have no idea what happens if that house is lost. I answered quietly. Neither do you. He hung up. I sat there staring at my phone. I expected to feel victorious. I didn't. I felt afraid. Because Michael had just confirmed something without realizing it. He knew about the default. He knew the house was at risk. And he had still been telling Mom everything was under control. But there was another question. Why had the bank contacted Michael weeks earlier without him telling her? And why was he still acting as if the house belonged entirely to him? I called Susan. She told me not to confront him again. Instead, we began building a timeline. Every document. Every transfer. Every conversation Mom could remember. Every date. Every payment. Every name connected to the loan. For the first time, I wasn't fighting my brother emotionally. I was documenting what had happened. And as we built that timeline, we discovered something neither of us expected. There was a payment made toward Michael's loan shortly before the property transfer. The payment hadn't come from Michael. It hadn't come from his business. And it hadn't come from the bank. It had come from an account connected to my mother. I stared at the transaction record. Mom didn't authorize this. Susan looked at me. Are you sure? Yes. Then we need to find out who did. I called Mom. She confirmed she had never made the payment. I asked if anyone had access to her account. She hesitated. Then she said, Michael has had my online banking information for months. I closed my eyes. That was the moment I realized the house might not be the only thing my brother had taken control of. He had access to my mother's money. He had access to her documents. He had access to her property. And now we had evidence that money had moved from her account toward his debt. But before I could process it, Mom said something else. Daniel. What? There was one other person who knew about the account. Who? She hesitated. Then she gave me a name I hadn't heard in years. A name from our father's past. A person I never expected to become part of this. And when I heard it, I realized Michael's financial problems may have started long before any of us knew. Because the person Mom had just named was my father's former business partner. My father's former business partner was named Richard Cole. I hadn't heard that name in years. The last time I had seen Richard, I was in my early 30s, standing beside my father at a restaurant after a meeting about the company they had once run together. Richard had been my father's closest business associate for nearly 15 years. Until suddenly, he wasn't. My father never explained the full story. Whenever I asked, he would simply say, some business relationships are better left in the past. I had always assumed there had been a disagreement over money. I never imagined that man's name would eventually appear in the middle of a fight over my mother's house. I looked at Mom. Why would Richard know anything about your account? She shook her head. I don't know. Did he ever contact you? Not recently. Then why did you say he knew about it? She looked toward the window. Because Michael mentioned him. When? A few months ago. My stomach tightened. What did Michael say? She thought for a moment. He said Richard had been helping him. I felt the room become very quiet. Helping him with what? I don't know. I called Susan. She listened while I explained. Then she said something that immediately changed our approach. Don't contact Richard yourself. Why? Because we don't know his involvement yet. And if your brother has been working with him, you don't want to alert either of them. So I didn't. Instead, Susan helped Mom take the proper steps to protect her accounts. She changed her banking credentials. She notified the bank that she had not authorized certain transactions. She requested copies of her account history. And she scheduled an appointment with an attorney who would represent her independently. For the first time since this nightmare started, my mother had someone on her side who wasn't emotionally connected to Michael. That mattered. A lot. Because when Mom met the attorney, something unexpected happened. She became angry. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just angry. The attorney went through every document with her. She explained what each one meant. She explained the difference between a temporary financial arrangement and a property interest. She explained the risk created by using the house as collateral. Then she asked Mom one question. Did your son explain that this arrangement could put your home at risk? Mom stared at the document. No. Did he tell you the loan was already experiencing financial problems? No. Did he tell you he had used money from your account toward his debt? Mom's face changed. No. The attorney looked at me. Then back at Mom. Then we need to find out exactly what happened. That sentence became the beginning of the end for Michael. But neither Mom nor I knew it yet. Over the next 2 weeks, the records started arriving. Bank statements. Property filings. Loan documents. Emails. Payment histories. There were gaps. Important gaps. But there was also a pattern. Michael had not simply borrowed money and then gotten unlucky. He had been struggling for much longer than he admitted. He had missed business payments months before approaching Mom. He had moved money between accounts. He had used his business credit to cover personal expenses. And, most importantly, he had repeatedly told Mom that the house was only temporary security. The documents didn't say that. They said something very different. Michael had obtained a substantial line of credit secured partly by his interest in the property. And there was another agreement attached to it. That agreement was the reason he had needed our father's old death certificate. I remember sitting at the attorney's office when she explained it. My father had died owning a small investment interest that had never been worth enough for us to fight over. Michael had been entitled to a portion. But there had been paperwork connected to the estate that needed to be completed before certain rights could be transferred. Michael had used that paperwork to make his financial position appear stronger to the lender. Then he had combined that position with the arrangement involving Mom's property. The whole thing was complicated. Not illegal on its face. But it had created a dangerous situation. And then we found something even more important. An email. It had been sent from Michael to Richard months before Mom signed the final documents. The email wasn't dramatic. There was no confession. No statement saying, I'm going to steal my mother's house. It was much worse because it was ordinary. Michael wrote that he needed to restructure the family property situation before the bank became aware of the full picture. I read that sentence 3 times. The full picture. That was what he had been hiding. Not from me. From the bank. From Mom. From Rachel. Probably from everyone. Richard had apparently advised Michael about restructuring his obligations. And that explained why Richard's name kept appearing. My father had once trusted Richard with his business. Now Richard had been advising my brother during a financial crisis involving my mother's home. I couldn't stop thinking about the irony. Dad had once warned us that money could turn family relationships into something ugly. He had been right. The final piece came from an email we almost missed. It was buried inside a long chain between Michael and the bank. The bank had asked him to provide evidence that the property interest being used as security was properly understood and authorized. Michael replied that his mother was fully informed and comfortable with the arrangement. But the date of that email was 2 weeks before Mom had even signed the document. That meant he had represented her consent before he actually had it. It didn't prove everything. But it changed the entire picture. Michael hadn't simply made a desperate decision. He had been preparing for the possibility that the bank would question the arrangement. And he had been doing it quietly. I wanted to confront him immediately. I didn't. That was the hardest decision I made. For years, I had responded to Michael emotionally. If he pushed, I pushed back. If he raised his voice, I raised mine. If he accused me, I defended myself. This time, I didn't. Susan told me something I never forgot. Don't try to punish him, Daniel. What should I do? Protect your mother. Let the facts speak. So that's what we did. Mom's attorney formally notified the appropriate parties that she was disputing her understanding of certain parts of the arrangement. The bank was given the documentation. The unauthorized transaction was flagged. The property records were reviewed. And suddenly Michael's biggest advantage disappeared. He couldn't control the conversation anymore. He couldn't tell each family member a different version of the story because the documents were speaking for themselves. Rachel received copies. She called me. I can't believe this. I knew exactly what she meant. I know. He told me you were trying to take Mom's house. I know. He told me you were jealous because he was closer to her. I closed my eyes. What do you think now? She was quiet. I think I owe you an apology. You don't. I believed him. So did I. That was the truth. I had believed Michael for years. Not because he was always honest. Because he was my brother. And sometimes that distinction is enough to blind you. Then Michael made his biggest mistake. He called Mom. She put the phone on speaker because her attorney had advised her not to have private conversations about the property. Michael sounded exhausted. Mom, I need you to stop this. Mom looked at me. I stayed silent. She said, stop what? You know what? No, I don't. You're listening to Daniel and his lawyer. Mom's voice became firmer. I have my own lawyer. Michael went quiet. Then he said, you're going to destroy everything. Mom replied, I didn't destroy anything. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand that my house is at risk. Because Daniel is making you afraid. Mom shook her head. No, Michael. The documents are making me afraid. That sentence silenced him. Then he said something that I don't think he intended anyone else to hear. I was trying to fix this. Mom asked, fix what? He didn't answer. She waited. Finally, he said, the business. There it was. Not a confession. But close enough. Mom's eyes filled with tears. You told me it was temporary. It was supposed to be. You knew the loan was in trouble. I thought I could recover. You used my money. I was going to put it back. Mom looked at me. Then back at the phone. You should have told me. Michael's voice cracked. I was scared. That was the first time I heard something real in his voice. Fear. Not arrogance. Not anger. Fear. And for one brief moment, I saw the brother I had grown up with. The kid who used to sit beside me on our father's workbench. The teenager who once stayed awake all night because he thought Dad might be disappointed in him. The man who had spent years pretending he was stronger than everyone else. He wasn't. He was terrified. But being afraid didn't make what he had done disappear. Mom asked quietly, "Why did you lie to us?" Michael didn't answer. Then the call ended. I thought that would be the final confrontation. It wasn't. A few days later, Richard contacted my mother's attorney. He agreed to provide documents relating to Michael's financial arrangements. I didn't know why at first. Then I learned that Richard had become concerned about his own exposure. He had advised Michael on some of the restructuring. But he had not expected Michael to represent certain things to the bank in the way he did. Richard wasn't a hero. He wasn't suddenly helping us because he had developed a conscience. He was protecting himself. And that was okay. The truth doesn't have to arrive for noble reasons to still be the truth. His documents showed that Michael had been discussing the property strategy for months. There were messages. There were draft agreements. There were notes from meetings. And there was one message that completely changed how I viewed the entire situation. Michael had written, "If I can get Mom to transfer the interest before the bank review, they can't separate the family property from my collateral." I read it in silence. I couldn't believe it. Mom had not been told that. She had believed she was helping her son survive a temporary problem. Michael had been thinking about how to position the property before the bank looked more closely at his finances. That was the secret. Not another woman. Not some hidden fortune. Not a movie-style conspiracy. Just a desperate man who had allowed fear, pride, and financial pressure to convince himself that taking control of his mother's property was justified. And that made the betrayal feel more real. Because ordinary people can do terrible things when they convince themselves they're entitled to them. The legal process moved slowly. Much more slowly than I wanted. There were meetings. Requests for records. Questions from the bank. Responses from Michael's attorney. More paperwork. At one point, I wondered whether we'd ever get anywhere. Michael also tried to negotiate. He offered to sell some business assets. He proposed refinancing. He wanted Mom to sign another agreement that would give him more time. She refused. That was the moment I knew my mother had changed. The woman who had once been afraid to make Michael angry was now sitting across from him and saying no. Not because I told her to. Because she had finally understood what was at stake. The bank eventually agreed to a restructuring that did not require Mom to continue carrying the risk in the same way. Michael had to sell several business assets. He had to repay money that had been improperly transferred from Mom's account. And the property arrangement was challenged and eventually unwound through the appropriate legal process. My mother kept her house. But there was one consequence I hadn't expected. Michael lost his business. Not because Mom destroyed it. Not because I sabotaged him. Because the business had already been failing. The loan had simply hidden how bad things were for longer than anyone knew. When the financial records were finally examined, the numbers didn't lie. He owed more than he could realistically repay. The company was sold. Several employees found other jobs. His reputation among some business contacts suffered. And he had to move out of the house he had been renting. For the first few weeks, I felt almost guilty. Then I remembered something. I hadn't done any of that. I hadn't taken his clients. I hadn't called his customers. I hadn't ruined his company. I had simply stopped allowing him to use Mom's property to hide the consequences of his own decisions. That distinction mattered to me. A few months later, Mom moved into a smaller place. Not because she lost the house. Because she wanted to. The old house had become too much for her. She sold it voluntarily after the legal situation was resolved. It was the first time in months that the decision about the property belonged entirely to her. She used part of the proceeds to buy a smaller, comfortable home closer to Rachel. And she kept the rest safely invested. No one else had access. No one else made the decisions. She had an independent financial advisor. She had her own attorney. And most importantly, she trusted herself again. Michael and I didn't speak for almost a year. Then one afternoon, I received a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A real letter. I almost didn't open it. But I did. He apologized. Not perfectly. He still explained some of his choices. He still talked about how scared he had been. He still said he believed he was going to fix everything. But there was one sentence that felt different. He wrote, "I kept telling myself I was protecting the family from the consequences of my failure, when really I was protecting myself from admitting I had failed." I read that sentence several times. Then I put the letter away. I didn't forgive him immediately. I wasn't sure I ever would in the way people mean when they say forgiveness. But eventually, I agreed to meet him. We sat at a coffee shop. He looked older. Not dramatically. Just tired. He said, "I don't expect you to trust me." I said, "Good." He nodded. I deserved that. For a while, we didn't say anything. Then he asked about Mom. I told him she was doing well. He smiled. That's all I wanted. I looked at him. "No, Michael." He looked confused. "You wanted to save yourself." He looked down. After a few seconds, he nodded. I did. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. We didn't hug. We didn't suddenly become brothers again. Life doesn't work like that. Some damage doesn't disappear because someone finally tells the truth. But something changed that day. I stopped carrying the responsibility for fixing him. That wasn't my job. My job was to protect the people I loved and make sure they weren't manipulated into protecting someone from the consequences of his own choices. A year after everything happened, I visited Mom on a Sunday afternoon. She was sitting outside her new house. There were flowers beside the porch. She had a cup of tea in one hand and a gardening magazine in the other. She looked peaceful. I sat beside her. After a while, she said, "Do you ever think about the old house?" I smiled. So. Me times. I thought I'd miss it more. Do you? She shook her head. No. Then she looked at me. You know what I miss? What? The people we were before we started fighting over it. I thought about that. Then I said, maybe we don't have to be those people anymore. She smiled. That was the moment I understood something I hadn't understood when this started. The house had never really been the prize. The real prize was control. Michael wanted control over the property because he believed it would save him. I wanted control over the truth because I believed it would save Mom. But in the end, neither of us needed to control everything. Mom simply needed the freedom to make her own decisions. And I needed to learn that protecting someone doesn't mean fighting every battle for them. Sometimes it means giving them the information, standing beside them, and letting them choose. The strangest part is that Michael did eventually face consequences. But not the consequences I once imagined. There was no dramatic courtroom scene. No police arriving at his door. No public humiliation. No triumphant moment where I stood in front of him and announced that I had won. Real life wasn't like that. His consequence was quieter. He had to sell the business he had built for years. He had to repay money. He had to rebuild his finances. He had to admit to people that he had made decisions he couldn't defend. He had to live with the fact that his mother no longer trusted him with her finances. And most painful of all, he had to face his own family without the image of being the responsible son. I didn't destroy that image. He did. I simply stopped helping him maintain it. And that is something I think about often. Because when people hear the word revenge, they imagine anger. They imagine someone planning the perfect way to hurt the person who hurt them. But the most powerful revenge I ever experienced wasn't hurting my brother. It was refusing to let him hurt my mother again. It was keeping records when he expected me to argue. It was asking questions when he expected me to stay quiet. It was allowing professionals to examine the facts instead of trying to win the argument myself. And it was watching the truth stand on its own. Michael once told me I would regret getting involved. For a while, I believed him. Now I understand something different. I don't regret getting involved. I regret that I waited so long to notice what was happening. I regret believing that because someone was family, they automatically deserved my trust. And I regret thinking that keeping peace was always the same thing as doing the right thing. Sometimes keeping peace only protects the person creating the problem. Sometimes saying nothing isn't kindness. Sometimes it's permission. But I also learned not to let betrayal turn me into someone bitter. I still love my brother. That doesn't mean I trust him the way I did. It doesn't mean I would hand him control over my finances. It doesn't mean I'd sign a document because he told me not to worry. Love and trust are not the same thing. And boundaries are not revenge. They're protection. Today, Mom still lives in the smaller house. Rachel visits her whenever she can. Michael is slowly rebuilding his life. We're not the family we were before. Maybe we never will be. But the fighting is over. The old house is gone. The documents are settled. The debts are being handled. And my mother finally sleeps peacefully knowing that her home, and her decisions, belong to her. Sometimes I think about that afternoon when Michael first told me the house was no longer my concern. He thought he was telling me that I had lost something. He was wrong. I hadn't lost the house. I had lost an illusion. The illusion that family automatically means trust. The illusion that the person who sounds the most confident must know what they're doing. And the illusion that staying quiet is always the mature thing to do. I learned to look at the facts. I learned to ask difficult questions. And most importantly, I learned that protecting someone doesn't mean protecting them from every consequence. Michael made his choices. He believed those choices would save him. In the end, those same choices exposed everything. I didn't destroy my brother. I didn't take revenge on him. I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own decisions. And somehow, that was enough. If you were in my position, would you have confronted Michael immediately, or would you have done what I did and quietly gathered the facts first? Do you think I was right to help Mom fight for control of her own property, even though it permanently changed my relationship with my brother? Tell me what you would have done. And if this story made you think about someone in your own family, share it with them. Subscribe to Royal Revenge Stories for more stories about betrayal, justice, and the moment people finally stop allowing others to take advantage of them. Because sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. Sometimes it's simply standing back, telling the truth, and letting their own choices catch up with them.